It's Tuesday night. Welcome to Wrestling Chat with Friends, the Tuesday show. We are proudly part of the Family Podcast Network. Yes, the Family Podcast Network. And we're heard on Apple, Spotify, our YouTube channel, Wrestling Chat with Friends, our Facebook page, Wrestling Chat with Friends, and our Twitter page at WCWF Pod. Please join us, retweet us, tell a friend, share it. Let's get this train rolling. I am EJ the Collector, joined as always each week by my tag team partner TG, who tonight is the Battle Royale with cheese. I like it. How you feeling, TG?
Feeling good. Looking forward to the Rumble, I think, as much or more than I ever have.
Yeah, me too. I have a renewed sense of optimism about where the direction they're heading in, hopefully, and the creative minds that are behind these storylines. So yes, I am very excited. They've built it up really well. We still have a ways to go before WrestleMania. But the Royal Rumble has traditionally been the kickoff to the WrestleMania season. Obviously, the Royal Rumble for the men and women will produce a winner who will get a crack at the world title. That's usually, I guess kind of always done at WrestleMania. So we're going to dive into it. Anything really on your mind wrestling wise before we jump into like the 30th anniversary show or Royal Rumble? Anything pressing that you want to get off your chest before we start?
To state the obvious, I think that the Bloodline storyline is one of the most entertaining things and well told stories that I've ever seen in wrestling. So I'm very excited about it.
I couldn't agree more. Last night was the 30th anniversary of Monday Night Raw. What's your earliest recollection of watching Raw?
Well, remember, sort of an unusual thing. Like, I was aware of pro wrestling as a kid, but I wasn't really into it. I was much more into, traditional sports and playing sports, watching sports, all that. I didn't really get into wrestling until I was in college. So, like, the first Raw that I remember watching was a buddy of mine that I played football with was over during Christmas break 1997. And I think that's the first time I ever actually really sat down and watched Raw. So it was like it was the year of the Montreal Screwjob, and it was in the wake of that.
Okay.
So it was like December of 97.
I kind of grew up watching NWA on TBS. I kind of grew up watching WWE, on the random Saturday nights where we'd stay up late. I was a Saturday Night Live fan from when I was a kid. But, 4 times a year, the local news would end. And instead of Saturday Night Live, because they didn't have the internet, you didn't have spoilers. I had no idea when I was going to be on. And randomly you'd see, tonight's SNL preempted by Saturday's main event. And it would be a big to-do. I remember the Tuesday Night Titan show that I guess Vince hosted. Before Raw, USA hosted I guess I forget what it was called, Primetime Wrestling, where they had Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan in the studio, in a little studio. I used to watch that. I do have some recollections of the very first Raw, seeing it debut. I don't remember really much through it. And I don't think I was really watching full time in 93, but I do remember, I think I did watch the very first Raw when it came on, and have watched, on and off for 30 years. When they do these milestone shows, they did the 25th anniversary. I remember the Raw 1000 episode. They're probably at 1500 by then. These are always they're these sort of one-off shows. Like we talked about the Saudi Arabia shows being sort of non-canon. Typically these milestone shows are kind of non-canon because they bring back just a ton of ex-talent. And last night was no exception. They did kind of pre-advertise most of the talent that would be there. I enjoyed last night's show. It felt a little disjointed. So I just want to kind of go through it and then kind of get your thoughts on it. In the past, they have sometimes opened these milestone shows with a different intro package, either referring back to like an old theme or something else. They didn't do that. They had their sort of traditional opening. And we had, the immortal Hulk Hogan quite, to be honest, the biggest wrestling star in the history of the world, for better or for worse, come out and open the show. He had his mouthpiece, the mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart, who's got to be pushing 80 years old by now, but doesn't look a day over 1983, really. Hulk, this segment will be most remembered for the microphone not working. Someone did come out and replace his mic, and Corey even say something about it.
There have been a couple of those. Like, I mean, AEW's had a couple of incidents with that happening recently. It's weird that technology all of a sudden is a problem, because you would think it just would get better and better and better. But yeah.
I mean, you think you do all the testing beforehand, but midway through his right before he does this, what you're gonna do, they had to make sure they gave him a mic that worked. Seeing Hulk Hogan in 2023 on Raw, Hogan's had a strained reputation the last dozen years. I don't have strong opinions on whether he needs to show up or not, but I sort of, get why they trot him out here once in a while. What'd you think? How do you think he looked? I'm really glad for two things. I'm glad that neither he, and we'll talk about Slick Rick coming out later, I'm glad that they didn't come all the way down the aisle. I'm glad they didn't climb into the ring. I'm glad they weren't standing in the ring. I don't think either of those two can command an audience anymore and hold an audience like that anymore. What do you think of the opening?
I think that the point that I was going to make is the one you just raised, which is I think that these are the kind of little things that, and I don't know if this is a Triple H thing per se or just something that they've collectively have kind of figured out over the years, but I think that little details like, let's have guys like that just stay on the stage rather than come all the way down the aisle, blah, blah, blah. I mean, Hogan, I know in particular, has, like, I think he typically, like, he can walk for short periods without a cane, but I think typically he uses a crutch or a cane because, of course, he has so many different issues. I think that, for a guy who's been through what he's been through physically, I think he looks good. I mean, he's an older man now, and of course, it's hard to think about comparing him to the way he looked in 1987. But hey, that's all of us. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think that the opening, other than the technical difficulties, it's fine. I mean, it's what's interesting about that is he, of course, is the most important star in the history of that company. But I don't really strongly associate him that much with Monday Night Raw per se, because his heyday was pre-Raw, and then when he came back the second time and had a nice run, as a heel and then a face. That was A, I think he was drafted as a SmackDown, if I remember correctly, and B, that he was sort of one of many people they had, or maybe they hadn't had the brand split by then. I can't remember at all the chronology, but the point is like, I get why he's there, because he is the symbol of sort of the rise of WWE as the promotion in the United States and worldwide. But I don't really think of him as Raw. So I thought, for what it was, have him open the show. It's a couple of minutes and then that's it. I thought it was, fine, understandable and fine.
Yeah, I'm generally
no strong feelings.
Had he not been part of it, I don't think it would have detracted from the moment or the importance of it.
No, if it had been like a 50th anniversary or whatever of, the modern WWE and he hadn't been there, that would have been weird. I don't think him not being at a Raw is anniversary would be that weird.
Yeah, I think they had to sort of walk a fine line last night, because there are some really important storylines that this new creative team has done a great job building over the last several months, and to sort of incorporate it into a nostalgia show can always be tough, because you have to give you're bringing all of these stars in, you're bringing them so they can be sort of featured, even if, albeit maybe not for just a couple of minutes, but you've got a packed roster with a packed show and lots of storylines. So you do have to kind of delicately figure out, and they did an okay job with that. There has been a lot of talk today about a glaring kind of like call they had to make during the match, and we'll get into that. But let's talk about what may have led up to this. Was this show kind of started with the trial of Sami Zayn. Now, last week it was sort of announced that there would be a formal sort of coronation with all of the bloodline, all of the tribe was going to be there. So we were suspecting appearances by the Wild Samoans and Rikishi, who is the father of the Usos. And it was certainly leading to the assumption that the entire bloodline would involve Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Now, they scrapped those plans, I guess, middle of last week and turned it into a trial of Sami Zayn, which seems a little more sort of, that makes a little more sense than, but it all depends on what they were trying to do with it. But that was all being built because they were hoping The Rock would. And you've been sort of talking about this for months about plan A, plan B, and then plan B1, And I think it seems like we may have reached that because word started getting out that The Rock has sort of notified WWE that he's not in ring. We'll say, just to talk about a guy who is in like unbelievable shape, not being in wrestling shape for a match. But there is a big difference between being jacked up Diesel and being able to go for 12, 14 minutes executing wrestling moves. So The Rock is obviously a great athlete, but he appears, whether it's scheduling or just his own timing or his own ability to be ready to go in a match, it seems as though we're not going to get that dream A unless they're saving it for Royal Rumble. Always possible. But, The Rock is a bona fide movie star. He is not a wrestler in any imagination now where he doesn't have a lot of free time. Someone like Stone Cold last year, who has a bunch of projects in the hopper, but does not have the schedule nor there aren't as many people counting on The Rock doing these things, or counting on Stone Cold as doing The Rock, and can affect the lives of lots of people. Where if The Rock all of a sudden has to change, stop. So I can see someone like Stone Cold having the time to get into enough shape to do a match last year. Not the same for The Rock. Disappointed or sort of resigned to the fact that this was almost more likely to happen?
Well, several thoughts in response to what you just said. I think the first thing is, to go back to something you said a minute ago, one thing about this Raw that's rather unique is that there was this confluence of circumstances that led to it having to do a number of things that the show normally would not have to confine to one episode. So the first thing is, this is the first week when they had Monday night to themselves. It's the first week the after, because last week we had the wild card game. So now there's no more football from here on out. So it's the first week where they're going to have consecutive weeks where they don't have a football game to contend with. So that's in the background. Second thing, as you said, is that they have all these irons in the fire as far as their storylines go that have sort of been built up over time. And it's the go home show for Royal Rumble for in terms of Raw anyway. And then finally, it also just happens to be this anniversary show. And so how do you fit all those pieces together? Well, as we'll talk about in a minute, as it turned out, even with what they thought was going to happen was we could do a commercial-free first hour and get everything and we need to. And it turned out that wasn't enough. So we'll talk about that in a second. But to go back to your question, I don't think I'm not disappointed, and here's why. And the example of Stone Cold Steve Austin, I think, is instructive and also explanatory for what the situation with The Rock is. Steve Austin last year, number one, the way that they played up that story with Kevin Owens, it was deliberately designed or framed in such a way that the expectations going in were lowered on purpose. It was like, it's not going to be a match. It's not going to be a match. And then when it was a match, it was like, oh, wow, they're actually going to have a match. That's great. This would be Roman versus The Rock. The expectations for this to be a good wrestling match and a bona fide like main event of main events would be through the roof. As I've said before, it's hard to, or it's easy to forget this, but The Rock hasn't wrestled in 10 years. He's 50 years old. So to go back to the Stone Cold example, if Stone Cold takes in that kind of match where it's sort of I don't want to say it's a garbage match, but it was much more of a sports entertainment type spectacle than it was attempting to be like a technical exhibition or like a super dramatic match, which is perfect. It was what it was supposed to be. But if Steve Austin takes sprains an ankle or takes a bad bump in that kind of match, A, he's not going to get seriously hurt because of the style that they're working. And B, he can still do a podcast or do a business deal or whatever. If The Rock takes a bad bump in the kind of match that they would want to have, that I think The Rock would want to have, he could miss out on a $20 million payday for a movie because he might be laid up for 6 months or not be able to, go to work or whatever.
The studio is out millions and millions of dollars.
Correct. The stakes are so much higher from a business standpoint for The Rock that I completely get why that would be his approach. Now, as you said, anything can happen. We don't know. We won't know till Saturday exactly what the deal is. But I think we will certainly know, come midnight on Saturday, we will know whether we're in plan A territory, which is unlikely at this point, or plan B or what it looks like. One thing that I kind of had forgotten until I was just looking at it yesterday, I totally forgot that Elimination Chamber, and I think this is salient to this conversation, Elimination Chamber is in Montreal, which kind of changes my thinking on maybe where they're going to go and sort of what the order of operations might be here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Could be bad news from a WrestleMania standpoint. Could be maybe not great news for Sami.
Yep.
The pay-per-view in between's in Montreal. And it's probably good news for, let's say, Cody. But we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Right. So the trial itself, you were an attorney in a formal life. Did this follow all standards and procedures for a legal hearing?
Completely by the book. I mean, you could show this in any 1L class across the country in an accredited law school, and no one would have any sort of issue, and they'd learn a lot, quite frankly.
It was an absolute substitute for a moot court. Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So, an unlikely.
I was like, "Am I on Court TV right now? I'm on the right channel." I had to check the program guide to make sure.
A little twist for me, an unlikely defender of Sami when things seemed all but over for him. Solo was about to deliver the thumb job to him.
Samoan Spike.
The Samoan Spike.
I think a thumb job is something else. Go ahead.
Something completely different. Thank you. But he was spared by the person who's been sort of like his main detractor for the good part of his time in the family. Jay stood up. Jay showed clips of all the times that Sami threw himself in front of Solo, in front of Jay, took the chair shots, stopped the referee to prevent losses. Basically, a pretty solid defense, if you ask me. And at the end, Roman sort of gives him a bit of a reprieve. We sort of got left sort of like we don't quite know yet. Maybe this was sort of thrown together because their original plan didn't come to fruition. But basically, Roman said, like, you're getting a stay of execution, but I better not see you till Saturday. So it really hypes up Saturday for this Roman Kevin match to see if and when Sami's interference is needed. How will it go down? We don't really know, but satisfied with where it left us. I mean, they two great work, fantastic work. Sami, Paul. First of all, let's talk about Paul for a second. We should never forget that Paul Heyman's probably one of the best talkers in history.
Yeah.
I mean,
you would be hard pressed to come up with a name that would be higher on that list than Paul Heyman.
Yeah, Bobby Heenan's the only name I think that could even come close when it comes like managers. And I think Paul has done different characters, but equally as important. But Paul's passion and drive is just unparalleled. Yeah, he should be the one. Ideally, he's the one down at the Performance Center coaching promos, doing what Dusty used to do. He was remarkable. Sami was remarkable. The Usos were both remarkable, and I thought it came off great. It made me more excited for Saturday.
I think as strong an hour of TV as Raw has had in recent memory, and I think there's several things about this story that make it so great. One of which you just touched on, which is every single person who's involved in this is hitting it out of the park. They're all doing great. There's no weak links.
Right.
Now, Sami is at this point transcendent, and Paul is great, but his level of greatness is we've come to expect this for 30 years. With Sami, who has always been a very, very good wrestler, and I've always enjoyed his character work as well, like this is just another level for him. And of course, Roman has been amazing too, and Jay is probably the most improved of anybody in the group. But what's particularly interesting about this is if you look at all those guys and how well they have played those roles, with the exception of Solo, who basically is just an enforcer who does whatever Roman tells him to do,
Mm-hmm.
it is extremely difficult in a good way to get a sense of what these characters' true motivations are from week to week.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, like there was a time when clearly Jay was the one who had a problem with Sami, and you kind of understood sort of where he was coming from. It's like, look, we are all blood here. And you have this guy who's an interloper and you're acting like he's as good or maybe even half a notch above us. Like, what is this? Is this a test? What is going on? And now through his actions, Sami has completely flipped Jay. Meanwhile, Paul, of course, is two-faced. And Roman is sort of now, whereas once he was seemingly a big fan of Sami, now it's like we're not quite sure where his insecurities acting up. Is that the problem here? But here's the other thing that's so fascinating to me about this story. If you go back a year and a half ago, whatever it was, and you had the beginnings of this, maybe 2 years ago at this point, you had the beginnings of this with like Jay and Jimmy and Roman and kind of how all that was fitting together. Roman's persona or his character vis-a-vis those guys was extremely well done, but his character was different than his relationship to Sami Zayn, and in this way. So his relationship to the Usos, probably still now, but certainly back then, was very much the sort of I'm, the big man on campus, senior on the football team, and you guys are sophomore JV call-ups. And I'm like, and which is sort of how sort of the real life story. Of course, there's little cousins and whatever, and he was a great football player and all that. But it's sort of that sort of high school type mentality and politics, whatever you want to call it. That's the structure of the relationship, and he played it perfectly, and it was beautiful. That is not what's going on with Sami Zayn. It is completely different. In that scenario, Roman is like the really hot cheerleader.
Yeah.
And Sami is like, I just want to make you happy. I just want to make you happy. And so you'll notice, and here's why that's such an important difference. On SmackDown, when Roman is annoyed with Sami, he doesn't look at him. He tells him to leave. He doesn't like threaten to beat him up or like challenge him to a match. Like that's the Usos, that's the football player, relationship. Mm-hmm. This is psychologically completely different. And what I thought was, and if we had talked Friday, I would have said all this. And then that dovetails beautifully to what they did Monday, which is Sami Zayn reached that point where perhaps all of us who have been entranced by a cheerleader at some point in our past or equivalent, reached that point that a lot of us reach, which is just like, I just don't care anymore. I just don't care. You're just giving me nothing emotionally. And I'm just, you want me to defend myself? My defense is I have no defense. Do what you will. Mm-hmm. Give me the Samoan spike. I don't care anymore. And that is where the storyline has progressed to. And it is just beautifully executed.
Yeah.
I love every minute of it.
It's really good. Here's where I actually was either away from my television. I must have missed something. Fill me in on how Sami ended up in the tag match.
So what happened was they did a spot where Jimmy did a dive to the outside, and then it was perfectly safe. It was he wasn't really hurt, but kayfabe acted like he was hurt. So then the official says he can't continue. Pierce comes out. They have a sort of a conference on, like you can hear him talking. And the point and Sami was like, sub me in, because remember when the Judgment Day was in I think it was the number one contenders match, they had the similar situation where Finn gets hurt and they were allowed to sub Dom in. And so by the same logic, Pierce is like, okay. And so that's how Sami got put in the match.
Gotcha. And the Usos retained. Well, the Usos, Jimmy, Jay, and Sami Uso retained over the Judgment Day. This was like the first match that we, in a long time, we're like, is this a moment where the titles could possibly change hands? Yeah. Judgment Day would be a reasonable duo to hold the titles, especially Dom, who's gotten immeasurably better, on TV, and his heat is at a fever pitch right now. So like it wasn't fait accompli that the Usos were just going to retain, like over the New Day when they were setting the record, or or even the Brawling Brutes. You just knew this wasn't the right time and place. We're in a position now where these Mondays between Royal Rumble Go Home show and WrestleMania, because they're putting final pieces together for Mania, it could happen. But it didn't. Now, what happened with this long segment and the long match was this caused a shuffle in their schedule, and the premier women's match on the card, Becky and Bayley, in a cage match, which they talked about for a week. Like, there hasn't been a cage match featuring women on Raw in 17 years. These are two of the four biggest stars in the company, certainly women's division right now. Didn't happen. We found out later it was sort of cut for time. I'd really hate to find out, even though it sounds like it, that letting X-Pac get a few lines in and Road Dogg getting a few lines in were the reason why we didn't get, and I want to sort of talk about, there's not much to talk about the match because it didn't really happen. I'm sure that I really wasn't their plan, but I think it did take some air out of the show. But before you just talk about anything you want to talk about with that match.
Yeah.
If we're going to have a 35th anniversary of Raw, are we going to have X-Pac out there? Are we going to have Ted DiBiase?
Yeah.
And Mike Rotunda out there? I like Mike Rotunda. Are we going to have these guys out in 5 years when even more people don't know who these guys are? Like this iteration of DX, or if they're going to try to trot out the NWO again without Hall, if it's just Nash. There were some talks earlier in the week that WWE had reached out to AEW, and when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, Billy Gunn's going to come out. This is great. This is going to work." Kurt Angle instead. Same with Kurt. Like, is this one of the last times we're going to see these guys sort of out here like this? I think it probably could be, and I think I'd be okay with it.
Okay, so two separate things. First, I'll take the second part first. So the nostalgia question, I think there are always going to be elements of that, but the thing is, pro wrestling is, I think, different than just about any other form of entertainment. That's not really a profound statement. That's fairly self-evident. But hey, Mark.
There's our producer, Mark, in for a second, out for a second. Cameo.
But as we get farther and farther in time, I think the practicality of bringing back some of these guys is what, not just for health reasons, but also for the reason you just pointed out, I think is going to be more challenging, because I think that the continuity of pro wrestling is such that things change so quickly, and there are things that, everybody knows who Stone Cold Steve Austin is. Everybody knows who Hulk Hogan is. But like once you start getting down into the Mike Rotundas of the world and people like that, and I have no objection to him being there, especially since his son is very prominent on the show. I think the value that you get from having those folks come back probably doesn't resonate as much as when we were at Raw 15 and all these guys were fairly recently had been in the company, and some of them could even still potentially go in the ring. So I do think you're going to see sort of diminishing aspect on that front. So here's what I think. This is me totally speculating, but this is what I think happened with the cage match, because I think as an outside observer, you watch this and you're like, gosh, of all the stuff to cut, why would you cut that? There are 5 other things on the show that you easily could have cut. So this is what I think happened. I think that probably there was a conversation backstage where they went to Bayley and Becky and said, here's the deal. This segment is only going to have, instead of having, let's say 25 minutes, it's only going to have 12 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever the case would be. So Triple H goes to them and says, it's up to you all. We can still do this match, or we can punt and do it later and give it 30. And I think that they probably opted to, that was probably the option that was presented to them. And that's what they decided to do. And from that standpoint, I think it makes sense, because the people who are running the show, Triple H is not dumb. He obviously would be like, oh, we can't cut that, that Miz KO segment. And we certainly can't cut that DX segment. Although I'm sure there was a little bit of like, no, we're not cutting the DX segment. Right. But like there were all those backstage vignettes and different things that easily could have been trimmed, at least trimmed. Mm-hmm. But I think even if they had been trimmed, that match was gonna have to be rushed a little bit, because so let's the DX segment, which by the way, I have to admit, like compared to the last DX segment, it was actually much, much better. Like I genuinely laughed at a couple of things that they did with Angle. Mm-hmm. But that segment, like that 6-man that eventually got to, that 6-man tag match was really fast. Yeah. Like that definitely got cut down as well. So I think there was probably one of those things where they said, you all are a priority, but we have to do like these other things. Like they're not going to cut the Undertaker segment. Like that's not getting cut. Right. They're not going to completely cut the DX segment, and probably not going to shorten it either. So I think that's what it came down to. It was a question of, is half a loaf better than none? Mm-hmm. Or would you like the whole loaf, but not this week? And they were like, let's do a short segment where the match never happens, and then we'll do it later. So I think people are understandably frustrated with it now, especially since it was the only women's segment on the whole show. But I think they will be happy later when that match gets the spotlight and the time it deserves.
I hope so. And another, and we don't need to get too deep into this because I think there's not much you can say opposite of it, but like the women's match, that cage match being, cut, and right, Bianca also,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. There was a Bianca had a short match against Sonya Deville.
Mm-hmm. So the women but I'll say this: the women, I don't think were very well represented in the anniversary aspect either. Alundra Blaze, Medusa was at the card table, but unlike past years, we had no Trish, no Lita, even Molly Holly, who's working for the company, wasn't there. And
apparently there was some, like the Bellas were supposed to appear, but then like there was some issue and they were frustrated or something.
Bellas sort of took to Twitter or Instagram to sort of like say, hey, why were there no vignettes featuring the women's revolution? And the reasons they sort of cited were because it'd be full of images of Saraya, formerly known as Paige, and Sasha Banks, and all folks who are currently not on the best terms with WWE. I guess if that's the reason, that's possible. It makes sense from WWE standpoint. It's just a bummer. It's just
they could. I think they could work. Like even WWE with their production skills, they could have worked around that very easily. I mean, we were remarking about this during the show, but there were, they didn't show any CM Punk clips. That wasn't hard to do. There were other guys though that they were fine showing, like Chris Jericho and Bryan Danielson and so on. So I think
Mark Henry, Big Show, Christian,
yeah. So I think that certainly if there were individual women or men, whoever, who were not maybe aren't on good terms with the company or left so recently that they didn't want to promote them, I think they easily could have worked around that.
So so
I
so
think,
so
yeah.
so that's not the excuse then. Like, was it just a dropped ball by not featuring them enough?
Here I think is the challenge that they're having right now. So right now, you basically have one storyline that is correctly, in my opinion, dominating all of their shows. And it just so happens that it is a storyline that doesn't include any women. So right there, you're already taking a big chunk of real estate, potential real estate away.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't, let me put it this way. If it weren't for the fact that the one segment we all know got truncated was that high profile cage match that had been promoted so heavily, if it weren't for that, if it had been something else, like let's say it was, I don't know, something with Elias, who just fell in the blank, I don't think people would have been as focused on that or as freaked out about it. So in other words, if that cage match happens and there still is like not that much sort of the history of Raw with a lot of women featured, I think it might get noted, but I don't think people would be as upset about it as it seems like those two things are related, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that I think is what people are worked up about. But I still, and I could be wrong about this because it's speculation, I still think that the cage match ultimately what was decided with that is something that on the night looks bad, but long term people are going to be happy with because it was a decision they made. It was actually a decision in favor of giving them a bigger spotlight ultimately, and that will unfold over the next few weeks.
What is the deal with these milestone shows and bringing legends back, and the really all they do with them is have a big poker game in the back? They gotta get. They gotta. I mean, they gotta get away from this. Like, let's all have them back in a poker game.
I think honestly, what that is the just the basic reality of how many of these guys can we get a payday, and the most efficient way to do that is have a wide ranging but fairly short
Mm-hmm.
backstage segment where everybody is on camera at once or whatever, has a line. Right. I mean, you may remember, in the past they would do, like you said, they would do stuff where it's like, oh, here's Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and here's Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and here, three other people. And of course, here comes Ron Simmons to deliver his iconic one-word line at the end. And I really do think that's like, it is a concession, let's say, maybe out of guilt a little bit that some of these guys weren't treated particularly well from a financial standpoint. I mean, certainly not some of them, but some of the people that they brought back for these sorts of segments. And it's like, let's see, it's like, it is the equivalent to the Legends equivalent to the creation of the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania. Is like, God, we have two distinct shows now, and WrestleMania pre 2 years ago is like, we got 3 to 4 hours, give or take. A lot of people worked hard this year. A lot of people contributed to our show as performers. How can we get them a share at WrestleMania if they're not in a program? This is how we throw them all in there. And I think this is kind of the equivalent of that.
The only thing we missed, I guess, last night was someone opening up a dark room and seeing the boogeyman come out, which I would have totally expected that. I guess they just didn't bring him in this year. So two big stars from the past that we have yet to mention. Nature Boy Ric Flair walked out, introduced his daughter. He didn't come to the ring. He didn't go 10 minutes talking about, the Marriott in Baltimore, like he sometimes can be prone to do when sort of given a mic in his hand. He seemed lucid enough, thanked everybody, brought his daughter out. And did he escort her to the ring? I was sort of in and out a little bit. I thought, either way, Rick's drip was sort of on point.
It was an impressive suit.
It was. He's a bit of a clown these days, but like anybody else, like any of those other stars, if you're going to talk about a milestone in wrestling, even though I don't 100% associate Ric Flair with Raw or even WWE personally, him and Triple H, I guess, have reconciled. They were sort of on the outs, but Rick can be such a wild card. If you listen to his podcasts or whatever, he will go after anybody any week, seemingly for no rhyme and reason.
Including people who work or used to work on the podcast.
Including them. Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess he really has to be monitored carefully, but he got, 2 minutes, didn't get as big a reception as I maybe expected, didn't get quite the one Hogan got.
Yeah.
These guys are just getting a little long in the tooth, and it becomes a little, pro wrestling, even if you're sort of smart to the game, can be a little bit stretch the imagination anyway. When some of these guys are now in their early 70s, it has become a law of diminishing returns. But Charlotte came out there, gave her dad the hug and kiss before going to the ring. Ric Flair, okay, I'm okay. I was far more personally a little polarized with the announcement, and again, this was the announcement before Raw, that for the first time since his induction into the Hall of Fame, we were going to see the return of The Undertaker. Now, Mark Calloway, since retiring and since being inducted, has given the world more access to him as Mark Calloway than he did in 30 years as The Undertaker. The ultimate protector of his gimmick is now doing Joe Rogan. He did the Kevin Hart's show. He's appearing anywhere and everywhere, out of character as Mark Calloway. Good for him. He should have. But he was coming back as The Undertaker. Now, he came back in one of the hottest segments going right now. LA Knight, Bray Wyatt, they're having a Mountain Dew pitch black match at Royal Rumble. We don't know what kind of match it's going to be, whether it's going to be an actual match. It'll probably be some Hollywood dramatic art project like we've seen Bray do in the past, which I'm all for. But we saw The Undertaker, but not as the dead man. We saw the return of the American Badass character, who you could argue we haven't seen since 2003. I would submit that the Boneyard match against AJ Styles was more of a American Badass character than a dead man character, even though it was in a graveyard, but with the Limp Bizkit, with everything. Yes, American Badass. This would have been, even though he's given us, I guess this is my point, is even though he's given us this new access to the man, he is so special a character that I didn't expect to really need to see him lumped with your Ron Simmons and your Kurt Angles and the guys that seemingly are living for this once a year now. Thoughts? You see what I'm saying? He seems a little too big time for that.
Yeah. Here's what struck me about that segment. And they didn't fully follow through on this, which I think was probably the right call. But I thought it was a little odd that they were setting LA Knight up to be sort of the fall guy for this non-active roster dude. And again, ultimately it was Bray Wyatt who delivered the actual aggressive, attack. But to me, it's I just think in where they are in that feud. And again, this is where we go back to the point about the timing for this show is weird, because you have the nostalgia show, anniversary show, and it's the last Raw before the Royal Rumble. And it's the first Raw where they've had Monday nights themselves. So that creates all these sort of conflicting creative pulls in different directions. And so one of them here, I think, was under normal circumstances, you would not have had LA Knight he wasn't made to look the fool, but he was sort of on the receiving end of this guy who's retired, and he's still kind of, scared of this guy. And I get it. I mean, The Undertaker is The Undertaker, but it was the timing of it to happen 5 days before the Bray's first match back and all that was interesting from a storyline sort of perspective between Undertaker and Bray. I thought that part I thought was interesting. I thought the part where Undertaker sort of seemingly whispers some mystical wisdom to Bray as he's, as his character is sort of developing. I thought that was interesting. To answer your question, though, yes, the Undertaker is a sort of a special character in the pantheon of WWE history. Yes, nobody protected his gimmick any better than Mark Calloway did. But I think at the point we are now where he really has pulled back the curtain and he's wearing a t-shirt promoting his one-man show,
Yeah,
I think we're sort of like in a post-Undertaker
for
era.
sure.
And so I think it's less jarring than it would have been 2 years ago.
Are we going to see Mark Calloway on Dancing with the Stars?
Oh, my God.
Is that possible?
I mean, I won't because I won't watch it. But
Right.
I mean, maybe people of the United States might see it. Not me.
Is that where we are? The whisper in his ear, in Bray's ear. You think that'll get fleshed out more? Or I think that was just for that night. Like I don't suspect we'll ever find out what was said or what it meant. Whether Bray's ever going to call back to it and reveal it, but it was a cool moment. It was a moment that kind of wish had happened 5 years ago.
Yeah, you never know with Bray. He may reference it at some point in the future, but I think you're right. I think it's basically just kind of a cool thing where there's an implication of a passing of wisdom or passing of the supernatural torch, but the specifics are left to the interpretation of the audience. But we got the theme of it, the feel of it we got, and I think that was the important part.
Yeah. Bianca went over Sonya. Austin Theory got the win over Bobby Lashley because of returning Brock Lesnar. Kind of one more big. Anytime Brock Lesnar, that music elicits such a pop from the crowd, and deservedly so. I guess is Brock's not scheduled for Royal Rumble. He will. I don't think he'll be competing in that.
But I think he might be there. I mean, well, I will say this. I thought before last night, before Bobby mentioned Brock in his promo, I thought that there would be something in the Rumble. I thought Bobby and Brock would square off in the Rumble. Brock probably eliminates Bobby, and then they have I think they will have a program, a match at WrestleMania now. What I'm not sure about is I think they have obviously foreshadowed a reunion of some sort with MVP, whether that is a fully fledged Hurt Business reunion or if it is just, Omos has his back or whatever. I'm not sure. Hurt Business would be better for them to all come back together with Omos. But of course they set all this up with MVP talking to Bobby saying, you don't need to have my back. I didn't need your help in the number one contenders match. And MVP being like, oh, okay, sure. And then Brock does his thing. And now the storyline beats are obvious, but in a good way. I mean, it's like, okay, now we've got something here. So I'm looking forward to it. Those guys obviously are going to have a very different type of match than say, Seth Rollins or whoever he faces at WrestleMania. But, I like the variety. I like both those guys. And, I think this will be a thing where probably Bobby winds up going over, but with the help of the Hurt Business. And, that could kickstart a good 2023 post-WrestleMania run for him.
No doubt about it. I like that you can have Brock involved and he doesn't need to be involved in a world title picture. Him and Bobby have danced around and toward each other for a long time. Seeing a big blow off at WrestleMania will be great. And it will also give some more believability if Lashley and Omos can certainly do something to take out Brock Lesnar. And I think Bobby should go over. But yeah, great they're getting a WrestleMania match. Before we start talking about the Royal Rumble card, because this is our Royal Rumble preview show, anything else from the 30th anniversary that you want to touch on, good or bad?
I'm sure there's something. I thought that what they did with Alexa Bliss was good. Her character direction in the last few months has been a major improvement over where she was probably for the prior year plus. So looking forward to seeing where that goes.
Let's talk about her match with Bianca Belair at Royal Rumble. They're facing off for the Raw Women's title. When you're this close to WrestleMania season, sometimes you don't always change the title. Do you see Alexa taking this title off Bianca on Saturday? If not, then what's it all for? I mean, she's either, in my opinion, she's either got to take the title and or call back to some dark moment with Lily and get back sort of within this Bray Wyatt thing, one or the other. Just to have her come out and lose again, I don't think would help.
Yeah, I don't want to see Lily. That was not a positive thing. Other than the fact that I know they sold a lot of them, which I'm sure was great for her. But so I think it's going to be one of two things, and you just said it. It's either going to be she beats Bianca for the title, which I think is unlikely. I don't think you're going to see the title change hands, but it's possible because this storyline and everything that is Bray adjacent is unpredictable at this point. But I think the more likely scenario is Bianca somehow walks out with the title, but something happens in the Bray supernatural Uncle Howdy, something's going on. So the interesting thing, to my mind, I mean, many interesting things, but one of the interesting things about that match is going to be the order on the card where these things fall. Because I think that and we talked about this when Bray was about to come, or the White Rabbit or whatever was about to come back, and was like, well, we'll know if, depending on when things happen. And it turned out to be that it was just kind of a standalone thing after Seth and Riddle's match. But I think where that falls on the card is going to be important, because it's either going to further whatever has already happened in the Pitch Black match, or it's going to set up something. And that's assuming that the two are going to be related. And they have heavily, heavily laid that groundwork, despite Alexa Bliss's protestations to the contrary. So I think it might be one of the Rumble matches will be the first match. Probably the Women's Rumble match will be the first match. Most likely. But I think that the Pitch Black match will come after the Alexa match, and we will have a sense by the time we get to that match of kind of what's happening. We won't know for sure, but the dots will start to be connected.
Okay. Let's talk about Women's Royal Rumble match. Let me hear a surprise entrant and your predicted winner.
Surprise entrant is going to be a returning. Well, I have a couple, actually. I think Asuka will return. I don't know if she's going to have a different name, but her presentation will definitely be different.
Okay.
And then I also think you're going to see probably Piper Niven, a.k.a. Doudrop. I think will come back with a new name.
Oh, I like it.
I don't think she'll be Doudrop.
I like it.
And if she doesn't come back in the Rumble, then I think that they'll rehabilitate her, so to speak, at NXT, and she'll be at NXT for a while. But
okay.
I say all that as somebody who doesn't watch NXT. So if she's already re-debuted in NXT, I wouldn't even know. So there you go.
Nope. And you want to make a prediction on who's going to win?
This is a tough one. Because I think the interesting thing about the women's picture in WWE right now is that, in a weird way, it's much more well defined than what's going on the men's side in terms of challengers. So like with the men, we'll talk about this in a second, like obviously Roman Reigns is the man. I mean, the man, the way that John Cena was the man, the way that Hulk Hogan was the man. Our producer Cheetah asked a really interesting question. Can Mandy Rose come back? Perhaps, if she's willing to take a pay cut. It really depends.
How much would she be losing out with being offline for a few hours?
Yeah, exactly. So we shall see. But anyway, the reason it's hard to kind of predict a winner on the women's side is I feel like there's a very clearly defined sort of, here are the top contenders and here are your two champions. And I'm just not sure of who else is going to bubble up to the top. I mean, Raquel, they've sort of set her up a little bit to kind of be that person. I mean, she, of course, challenged Ronda Rousey, almost won, and then Charlotte wins the title. So Raquel, perhaps. You've got Liv Morgan kind of floating in the mix, but I don't know. I'm not sure if her character, I think, has been rehabilitated. The second time I use that word. a little bit, but I don't know if it's quite there yet. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Chances out of 100, I know it's going to be a low number, but I don't think it's 0. Chances out of 100 that we see Sasha Banks in the Royal Rumble.
Oh, I think 0.
You think 0?
I think 0. I just think, yeah, that would.
I don't think it's 0. I don't think it's high. I think I would say, because here's the thing. She was
business wise, like her involvement with New Japan.
That's no big deal.
But New Japan has a deal with AEW, and again, all these things can be worked out. I think that if you bring her back, if you're not going to have her win.
Oh, she'll win. If she's back, she wins. No question.
If she's back and she wins, then she's back in WWE, and I just do not see that. There's 0 to the suggestion that that's the trajectory this has been going.
I'm going to say 1.
Needs to be in AEW. Well,
I'm going to say 1. 1 out of 100. And it's probably a fraction of that, but I'll just say 1 out of 100.
I think it's far more likely that Naomi comes back, perhaps.
Well, that's Mark anticipated my next question, which was going to be 2 parts. 1, chances she comes back, and 2, does she join the Bloodline?
Well, I think Naomi's chances are more like 25, like 1 in 4. Because she did come back and joins, it helps the Bloodline, joins the Bloodline. That would make a lot of sense. I do sort of it does sort of feel to me that Naomi or Trinity and Mercedes are kind of a package deal. Mm-hmm. They've been sort of very much. Now, Trinity did not come out in Japan when Mercedes made her debut there, and she doesn't appear to be involved with that company. But I'd say, Trinity makes a lot more sense than Mercedes. I think Mercedes has left that behind and moved on.
I'm quite frankly so surprised she still is involved in wrestling at all. I thought she was just going to become a full-time actress.
I think it's partly that perhaps it hasn't taken off exactly the way maybe she expected, coming off the heels of The Mandalorian. Like, if she was getting hit with project after project offer, she wouldn't have gone to Japan.
Yeah. But I don't disagree with you, but I will say, depending on what her payday was for one night, I mean, she might have been like, I've got projects, but man, this is, $1 million or something for one night, or $500,000. Bottom line, if I'm booking the Women's Royal Rumble, and this could be the winner, Rhea Ripley.
Yeah, that's who I'm picking to win.
Yeah.
I think she's being set up as this dominant female who, when she's ready, she will take over. I mean, she's leading the Judgment Day for all intents and purposes. So
I have one worry about this, and that is she wins the Royal Rumble. Now she's on Raw, but if you win the Royal Rumble, you can challenge either champion. If they have her win, which I am all in favor of, and then she winds up challenging a face, Charlotte Flair, on SmackDown, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to lose. That might be enough to be like, you know what? I'm done. No, you cannot cram this down my throat. But what would make more sense is Bianca retains, Rhea and Bianca at WrestleMania. It's a great match. That I think makes the most sense.
Definitely. All right. Roman and Kevin, like, Roman's not going to drop the title before WrestleMania.
No.
The bigger question is, does he lose at WrestleMania? I mean, and we will get to that down the road. Because I started having thoughts of, like, what does WWE want that final shot to be with the fireworks? The one that's going to be on ESPN, the one that's going to be featured next couple of days. Like, in some ways, you want it to be this Roman Reigns head of the table, getting that moment, featuring it with somebody else. almost feels a little bit less. But the storyline over the last year suggests that he's dropping the title at WrestleMania. So we'll get to that. We'll
Yeah.
get to that later. But I think there'll be shenanigans. The shenanigans will obviously probably result in the final snap of Sami Zayn's involvement in the bloodline. Whether Sami helps Kevin, whether Sami hurts, makes a final plea to Roman that maybe falls on deaf ears. Who knows? But this ending will not be a surprise of the outcome because Roman will win. It'll be about how we get to what's going to happen with Sami in the month or two after this.
What is Sami Zayn's final test? Because that was referenced explicitly a couple of times on Monday.
Yeah.
And we know we're not going to see him. Well, in theory, we're not going to see him Friday because that's what Roman told. I don't want to see you till Saturday, which also was interesting that they did that. And my thought on that is, I think this is a guess. I think they want to see what the reaction is to Roman without Sami there to sort of get some face response. And just if Roman comes out and cuts a heel promo the night before the Royal Rumble without Sami there to sort of balance the reaction, what does that sound like? Maybe, and maybe just to give Sami a night off. I don't know.
Possibly, but if Roman comes out Friday and he's drowned out by Sami Uso chants,
that's the other thing. Correct. Yeah.
They don't. This is not an easy call to make on Saturday. I'm sure the call's been made, probably. But
I think there's a lot of different ways you could go in the men's Royal Rumble.
Yeah. So I'm going to toss out there. I think we will see the return of Edge.
Yes, agreed.
Which is cool. Like, I don't think he's going to win the Royal Rumble, but his involvement is not to win the Royal Rumble. It's to get back and probably, I'm guessing, set something up with the Judgment Day. That's sort of where they left off. But, they've been teasing this sort of, at some point, the Demon has to return for at least one more. I mean, that's his best character. Demon Finn versus, whatever Brood Edge. Like, the Edge doesn't need to change his character, but if Edge could bring the Demon out of Finn, and maybe that sets plots a course for the Judgment Day. Finn's a bit of an afterthought in the Judgment Day right now. Damian Priest is kind of the muscle. Dom has been featured incredibly heavy. Ray is the leader of the group. So, Finn's sort of right to also maybe get the boot, but I think Edge's return is intended for Finn, not the championship. And I'm right now I'll just reserve my pick to win. But you want to do any surprise entrance you want to see or expect to see?
I don't think we can completely rule out Randy Orton, but from the news that has sort of bubbled up about his injury has led me to think that I think he might be. You don't want to say done, especially with what they can do now with Nex.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like that injury, once he took some time off and they actually looked at it, it was worse than I think they originally thought.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I do think we'll see Riddle back because I think his suspension is up. He's coming back, which is like, it's hard to see them investing much more in him without him demonstrating that he's, good to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the burden of proof is on him. Here's a prediction, a non-specific prediction. There will be somebody who comes out who has most recently been seen in AEW, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. I haven't seen him in a long time. I don't know if it's going to be like a Shawn Spears type thing, but somebody who, again, was an AEW guy, and then he's just been off our radars, and I certainly have forgotten. And then I see him, I was like, oh yeah. And he'll come. Somebody like that will be in the mix.
Interesting.
I do. I thought for sure that we would see Brock in the Rumble. Now I'm less sure because of what they did Monday, but it's still, I think, quite possible. I'm going to go out on a limb and say
is Bobby planning on being in the Rumble? I don't think so. Well, I don't know. I mean, he could always come out.
Well, I think since he didn't win the U.S. title, I would think especially that he would. It would be weird for him just not to appear on the show.
Right.
The thing that makes the most sense would be he's in the Rumble and Brock's in the Rumble, and of course they, one eliminates the other somehow, and then they keep going. I do think if Sammy's not in the Rumble, that crowd is going to lose their mind, like the year that when Dan O'Brien.
Does the men's Royal Rumble close the show, or does the Roman Kevin match close the show?
That's a great question. I think it depends on who. It depends on who they're going to have to win. Okay, so here's a couple of quick thoughts on.
Because you can have if you have Roman and Kevin as the penultimate match, you can have Sami get taken out, so it seems that he's not in the Rumble.
There's a number of things that opens up.
Yeah.
One is, and I agree. Mark is making a point here. I think that the final test could be something where it's like, is Sami going to step aside at the end of the Royal Rumble, or is Sami going to do something that is what Roman wants him to do, but clearly is at odds with what Sami should do, whether it's vis-a-vis Kevin Owens or vis-a-vis something in the Royal Rumble. But I don't know, because there's a lot of different ways you could book this. One way that occurred to me is you could potentially, I'm not saying they're going to do this because it's complicated and admittedly a little convoluted. One thing you could do is you can do the sort of the double finish like they did with Brett and Lex Luger, and like they accidentally did with Cena and Batista when they weren't supposed to. Because Roman has 2 titles, and I've gone back to this a few times, and I've said I don't think Roman. And Cheatham has said this as well. I'm not sure he's going to not be a world champion for like the rest of this year too, like all the way into next WrestleMania. But at some point he might lose, if they split the titles, he might lose one of them, and that would be a way to do it. And Adam Pearce or whoever, or God, maybe Vince comes out to say, you were going to be main event both nights, defending each title. I could see him doing that, but this is just me fantasy booking. I think that the most obvious thing would be, and it frustrates me to say this, but I'm really hoping it's not going to be Cody. Not that I have anything. He's a good wrestler, but man, if you are going to pass up the potential gold that you have with doing something around the storyline you've been building for 2 years, unless it's a scenario where Cody wins, but then just loses at WrestleMania to Roman, and Roman continues on, which that would be okay. I don't think you get as much fan interest in that matchup, but it would be fine. It would be a decent story to tell, but it's a story that you're telling from January 28th until April 1st or whenever WrestleMania is. The other alternative is to tell a story that has been going on for 2+ years.
Yeah.
And then if you add in the element of Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, like that dynamic, that now you're going back how many years? I mean, way before WWE. So of course I mean, if you're asking me who I want to win the Rumble, even though I think given that Elimination Chamber's in Montreal, it's probably not likely, Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn winning the Rumble would be fantastic. The fallback plan would be Sami and Kevin challenge the Usos at WrestleMania, which also would be good, but I don't think would be as satisfying as.
There still is a pay-per-view in between, so like
Elimination Chamber.
Yeah, so if Sami helps Kevin Saturday, I mean, it's theoretically you could have the blow up happen at the Royal Rumble. You could have Roman versus Sami at Elimination Chamber. However that ends up, then allows Sami and Kato to take on the Usos at WrestleMania, and you have Cody win the Rumble. It's been set up for. I mean, they never expected this Sami phenomena to happen.
Yes.
So I'm sure they have in place this whole Cody is going to ascend. And again, we'll talk about in upcoming weeks, like whether WWE wants to have that final graphic be Roman Reigns or somebody else to close out WrestleMania. I'm still thinking that the Sami saga ends, or not end, maybe not ends, but results in a match at at Elimination Chamber with Roman. But again, this year it is so hard to predict, which is refreshing because in the years past we knew that Roman was going to win. Then we knew, holy shit, Roman's going to win again. And then you have Batista. Of course, you've had enough of these, and it got a lot of backlash. And I'm glad that we really, even though Cody makes a ton of sense just by the way they've built it, Sami makes as much, if not more, sense now. If you're actually going to like book your show based on sort of trends, any trend forecaster would say Sami gets his WrestleMania moment. Yeah. And so it's hard to argue with.
Yeah. And here's the dilemma that you have if you're WWE creative. There's a strong case to be made for, and this is probably what I would be saying if I were in these creative meetings. I completely understand where you're coming from the long-term storytelling around Cody. He's set up when he came back, like, this is a quest. I want to fulfill the dream that my dad could never, blah, 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 blah. Totally get it. It's a good story. It is a good story. But once in a while, you have lightning in a bottle. They had lightning in a bottle with Daniel Bryan. They've got lightning in a bottle with Sami Zayn. So my thing would be, if you are even open to the possibility that Sami could be the one to dethrone Roman, you save that for WrestleMania. If you are dead set on, like, look, we love where this is going, but there's no scenario where Sami Zayn, who has not, in fairness, has not been built up to be a credible challenger in terms of in-ring performance to Roman Reigns, there's no scenario where he wins. 100% you do it at Elimination Chamber, because that the big payoff will be his entrance at Elimination Chamber will be, I mean, you're talking about the arena shaking. That will be unbelievable. So you do that, and then you figure something else out for WrestleMania. It's probably Kevin and Sami against the Usos, which again would be good. Would be good. I'd enjoy it. It'd be fun. But if the close of night 2 of WrestleMania is Cody versus Roman, of course I'll watch it. Of course I'll enjoy it. But it doesn't excite me the way that The Rock and Roman would have, or even Sami Zayn and Roman, or even like a triple threat with Sami and Kevin and Roman, or any of those scenarios. So that's just
agreed. Well, the first step toward WrestleMania will occur this Saturday. It's on Peacock. We'll be watching, and we'll talk about it next Tuesday. I'm looking forward to next Tuesday. Clear your schedule. Make sure you're on with us. We'll talk about how it all unfolded, where we go from here. It's going to be one of the better, more anticipated pay-per-views in quite a while. And again, Royal Rumbles always have amazing returns. You asked me a 1 out of 100 question. 1 out of 100 that Bob Backlund shows up. And I've watched. There's been so many videos on my feed of every entrant of the last 1 through 30 in 1987, 1996. Bob Backlund showed up as recently as like a couple of years ago. He's in his 70s, I'm sure, but that dude
73.
Is 33. So he's basically Ric Flair's age. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have wanted to see Santino Marella come back for the Royal Rumble, although he just signed with Impact. So
yeah, I was going to say,
he did, but he's always great. And we'll see if Kofi does one of his spots this year. It's always fun to watch what Kofi can pull off. Anyway, we're at an hour.
We agree that Big E's off the table because
I would think so. I would think so. I mean, I think nothing has been reported to suggest he's ahead of schedule. It was pretty clear he was gonna give it a year, which would be March, before he even tested it.
Yeah,
So
and the last thing I heard about, which is crazy, is like I saw him. I can't remember if it was in an interview or just something he said on Twitter, but he was like, "Yeah, I didn't even have to have surgery on it," which is crazy. I mean, just a testament to how strong his neck is, and so
yeah.
that's good news that there was no surgery involved. But obviously, it's a long
And there's also
healing
been some
process.
reports that it wasn't healing as fast as, or he wasn't quite on schedule.
Yeah.
So for all those reasons, yeah, he's out of the picture. He's going to be out more than a year. So I think no biggie, no Randy for the time being. But we will come back on Tuesday and talk about it. TG, thank you as always. I love your insight. Definitely needed your legal counsel tonight when we talked about the trial of Sami Zayn, so I appreciate it. Glad didn't get my dad on the line here to cut through some of that tough illegal context here. Thank you for joining us tonight on Wrestling Chat with Friends, the Tuesday show. Follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Get us on Apple and Spotify. We'll be back on Thursday to talk AEW and Ring of Honor and a really exciting match that got scheduled for Dynamite tomorrow. Mark Briscoe versus Jay Lethal is going to be awesome. We'll talk about it Thursday, and we'll see you next Tuesday. We don't count it out like we do on the Thursday show here. We tap out. So I'm tapping out. Ring that bell. We're out of here.